Hello and welcome to your favorite series of history videos. Today we will be discussing post-war anxieties and the counterculture during the 1960s.
This topic is very interesting because it is a little bit different from what you normally hear in your history classroom. That is because the topic covers less of the government and more of the people in the United States.
Yes, and during this time in history there were many social revolutions including political and social movements, as well as sexual and women's revolutions. The overwhelming majority of individuals taking part in these counterculture movements were America's college-age youths.
Let's spend some time reliving the 1960s so we can get an understanding of what it was really like. But first, we should be able to understand why there were post-war anxieties and why counterculture was so present.
Well, the culture in America started to drastically change leading up and throughout the Vietnam War. This is because many American citizens felt as if the U.S. government was too aggressive during the war, hiding information from them and ignoring the issues that were on the home front.
Yes, this war really began to change the way Americans viewed the government. Instead of buying houses with white picket fence and following strict social norms, U.S. citizens started to be more free and open with their image.
One way people began to change social norms was with political and social movements. During the 1960s, many college-age men and women became more politically involved. These individuals were the driving force behind many civil rights and anti-war movements that prevailed during this decade.
One of the first major counterculture youth protests took place in 1964 on the Berkeley campus of the University of California. Their cause was called the Free Speech Movement.
Berkeley was actually one of many colleges that held protests regarding the free speech movement. This movement began as a way to spread civil rights, but it turned into being protests against the Vietnam War.
Similarly, a closely related major event linked to counterculture during the 60s included the Kent State University protest over the bombing of Cambodia during the Vietnam War. This protest was led by college students who felt the United States government had not acted in good faith during the invasion of Cambodia.
These protests were very significant as it started a counterculture within colleges where students started to make their voices be heard.
Counterculture in the 1960s also introduced the concept of the flower child and the hippie. Hippies are known as people of unconventional appearance associated with subculture involving rejection of conventional norms and the taking of hallucinogenic drugs. A flower child was a hippie who wore flowers as symbols of peace and love.
These groups of people, who were the baby boomers entering their teen years, were known to be rebellious with their styles of dressing, drug use, and for some people, communal living. Hippies and flower children were known to sport long hair, beards, beads, and jeans. They also popularized rock music during this era, including bands such as the Beatles and the Rolling Stones.
Hippies and flower children embraced all values that their parental generation had previously not. This began a trend for many suburban teens, and they soon too rejected the suburban conformity designed by their parents.
One smaller group of people that encompassed some of these ideals were referred to as the Manson family. They were a glorified cult that was dictated by their leader, Charles Manson. The Manson family consisted of a group of young hippies that quickly turned into spun-out murders due to the influence of their leader. The Manson family encompassed the ideas of premarital sex as well as recreational drug abuse.
The Manson family was a radical group of hippies, and therefore they did not properly represent the lifestyle of most hippies and flower children.
Another movement that flourished in the 1960s was the feminine movement. Due to the increased education and employment of women in the 1950s, the women's movement returned during the 1960s.
During the 1960s, more American women would enter the workforce than ever before. This was made possible by the changes in cultural and societal norms.
One of the main reasons that more women were able to become more involved in the workforce came as the result of the 1960s federal government ruling that approved the birth control pill.
Now that women were no longer worried about becoming impregnated or having as many children as before, they were able to focus on a career and fighting for social issues they felt strongly about. Goals of feminists in the 60s included equal pay for equal work, an end to domestic violence, an end to sexual harassment, and sharing of responsibility for housework and child rearing.
Related to these goals of feminists, two acts that were enacted in the 1960s included the Equal Pay Act of 1963 and the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Unfortunately, these acts were poorly enforced and led to little change for women.
The goals and mindsets of feminists is thoroughly discussed in the book The Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan, written in 1963. The book explains how this group of feminists is the second wave of feminism in the United States. As you can see, the counterculture and anti-war anxieties in the 1960s were a very crucial part of history in the United States. The idea of breaking social norms continues to popularize today through movements such as the Women's March and Black Lives Matter movement. Although many of the groups that were created in the 60s have died off, the concept of breaking societal norms is certainly prevalent in the United States today.